The monster from the stars, the morning light filtered through Verdania's floating canopy in shades of gold and emerald, casting dancing patterns across the forest floor, where Ziravel moved with practiced silence. Her crystalline skin caught and reflected the bioluminescent glow of the hover moss, creating small rainbows that flickered with each careful step. At 23 cycles old, she was among the youngest scouts ever chosen by the Kaleri Council, her natural ability to blend with the living, light of their world making her nearly invisible to predators and prey alike. The sacred grove stretched. Before her, ancient trees whose roots never touched ground but drew sustenance directly from Verdania's energy-rich atmosphere. Their massive trunks glowed with soft blue veins of concentrated life force. And Zira felt the familiar peace that came from being among these eldest of her people's guardians. She had come here to gather crystal fruit for the upcoming Harmony Festival, but something was wrong. The usual symphony of forest sounds had fallen silent, replaced by an odd metallic tang in the air that made her sensitive. Nasal chambers burn. Then she saw it. A wound in the sacred grove's heart. Twisted metal and shattered ceramic lay scattered across the luminescent moss, still smoking from atmospheric entry. The object that had fallen from the sky was roughly the size of a small dwelling, its hull blackened and torn open like the shell of a mortally wounded seed pod. Zira's breath caught in her throat as ancient warnings echoed in her mind. The star-cursed ones, the flesh devourers who sailed between worlds in metal wounds, bringing death to all they encountered. A movement within the wreckage made her freeze. Something was alive in there. Her every instinct screamed at her to flee, to return to the village and alert the circle guards, but curiosity had always been her weakness. The same trait that made her an exceptional scout now rooted her in place as a figure emerged from the crashed vessel. It stood upright on two legs like a Kaleri, but there the resemblance ended. Where her people were slender and graceful, this creature was broad and powerful, its skin not crystalline, but a strange pale tone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dark hair covered its head in a way that reminded her of the shadow moss that grew in the deepest caves, and when it turned toward her location, she saw eyes the color of the deep earth. Marcus Chin had been having the worst day of his career as a xenobiologist. The diplomatic mission to establish contact with the Kaleri had gone sideways when their ship encountered a gravitational anomaly, forcing him to evacuate an emergency pod. Now he stood among the wreckage of his escape craft, checking his injuries and trying to figure out how to contact the main vessel. The cuts on his arms from the rough landing were superficial, but bleeding freely. And his emergency medical kit had scattered somewhere in the crash. What he needed most was to find shelter and treat his wounds before they attracted any local predators. He didn't notice the crystalline figure watching him from the tree line until he was halfway through opening his emergency supply pack. The motion of his hands as he tore open a protein ration bar must have caught her attention, because suddenly she was there, visible among the glowing vegetation. Marcus had seen images of the Kaleri from long-range surveys, but meeting one face-to-face was breathtaking. She was beautiful in an entirely alien way, her skin appearing to be made of living glass that caught and scattered the forest natural light. Her large eyes were the color of new spring leaves, and her hair seemed to move with its own internal luminescence. "Hello there," Marcus said softly, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Marcus. I come in peace." He tried to remember the few words of Kaleri the expedition's linguist had taught him, but his mind went blank under the intensity of her stare. Instead, he slowly reached for his translation device, hoping technology could bridge the communication. Gap. Zero watched in growing horror as the creature tore open some kind of container and began consuming what looked like dried flesh. The stories her grandmother had told her suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. The star-cursed ones fed on the living essence of other beings, growing stronger with each life they devoured. And now one of them was here, in the sacred grove, desecrating. this holy place with its presence. When it began making sounds at her, probably some kind of hunting call, her paralysis finally broke. She turned and ran, her natural agility allowing her to leap between the floating root systems and swing from the bioluminescent vines that connected the great trees. Behind her, she could hear the creature crashing through the undergrowth in pursuit, its heavy footsteps shattering the peaceful silence of the grove. It was hunting her just as the story said it would. The flesh devourers were relentless. Once they caught the scent of prey, and she was alone, miles from the village with no way to call for help. Marcus cursed as he stumbled through the alien forest, trying to follow the crystalline being who had fled from him. He understood her fear. Truly he did. First contact protocols existed for exactly this reason. Two completely different species meeting for the first time was bound to cause misunderstandings. But he needed help, and she was the first sign of intelligent life he'd encountered since the crash. If he could just communicate with her, explain that he was a scientist studying plant life, not a threat to anyone. The forest around him was unlike anything he'd studied before. Trees that floated without roots, moss that glowed with its own internal light, vines that seemed to pulse with energy. As a botanist, part of him wanted to stop and catalog everything he saw, but the blood loss from his injuries was making him dizzy. He needed medical attention soon, and the Kaleri might be his only hope of getting it. A sound from above made him look up, just in time to see a flash of crystalline skin moving through the canopy. She was faster than any human could. Hoped to be in this environment, but she was also panicked. Panic made people make mistakes, and in a forest full of unknown dangers, mistakes could be fatal for both of them. Zira's heart hammered against her ribs as she leaped from branch to branch, the creature's pursuit driving her deeper into the wild regions of the forest. These ancient paths were dangerous even for experienced scouts, filled with predators that the village guards worked constantly to keep at bay. But she had no choice. The flesh devourer behind her was relentless, its alien sounds echoing through the trees as it tracked her movement. She paused on a broad platform of woven branches, trying to catch her breath and plan her next move. The village was still hours away, and her pursuer showed no signs of tiring. Worse, the sounds of her flight were attracting attention from other quarters. In the deep shadows beneath the canopy, red eyes were beginning to glow. The shadow maws were stirring, drawn by the noise and the scent of fear. Of all the predators on Verdania, they were the most dangerous. Able to phase partially out of normal space to avoid the light-based defenses her people relied on, Marcus heard the low growl before he saw the creature emerge from the shadows. It was roughly the size of a large bear, but its proportions were all wrong. Too many joints in its limbs, eyes that glowed with their own malevolent light, and patches of its hide that seemed to shift and blur as if it couldn't quite maintain physical coherence. He'd read about Verdania's apex predators in the expedition briefings, but seeing a Shadowmaw in person was terrifying. The thing moved wrong, as if it existed partially in some other dimension dot above him. He could hear the Kaleri making distressed sounds. She'd stopped running, probably cornered by more of these things. Marcus looked at his emergency flare gun, then at the wounds on his arms that were still bleeding freely. He was injured, exhausted, and facing an alien predator that his weapons might not even affect. The smart thing to do would be to retreat, find somewhere to hide until rescue arrived. Instead, he started climbing toward the sounds of distress. Zira pressed herself against the trunk of the great tree, trying to become one with its glowing bark as 3 shadow maws circled the platform below her. They had her scent now, and their phase-stepping ability made them nearly impossible to escape once they locked onto prey. Her people's light-based weapons were effective against them, but she carried only a small ceremonial crystal, enough to stun a minor predator but useless against mature shadow maws. The largest of the 3 began to phase upward, its form becoming translucent as it prepared to materialize on her platform. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the Light Mother, asking forgiveness for leading the flesh devourer into the sacred grove and preparing herself for the end. At least her death would be quick, and the star-cursed one below would likely meet the same fate she did. The explosion of light and sound that followed made her eyes snap open in confusion. The lead Shadowmaw was writhing on the platform, its hide smoking from some kind of chemical burn. Below, the flesh devourer stood with a smoking tube in his hands, making loud sounds that might have been warnings or challenges. He fired again, and another burst of brilliant flame struck the second Shadowmaw, driving it back into the shadows. But there were still more of them coming, drawn by the noise and the scent of wounded prey. The creature, Marcus, was bleeding heavily now, his pale skin growing even paler as he lost blood. He looked up at her, and in his dark eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Not hunger or malice, but determination. He was protecting her, putting himself between her and the predators, despite having every reason to let them take her. The third Shadowmaw materialized behind him, its claws extended, for a killing strike. Without thinking, Zira threw her ceremonial crystal down with all her strength. Its stored light bursting against the predator's hide and buying Marcus the seconds he needed to turn and fire. The flare caught the creature center mass and it dissolved back into shadow with a shriek of pain and rage. For a moment, the forest was quiet except for their heavy breathing. Marcus swayed on his feet, the flare gun falling from nerveless fingers as blood loss finally overcame his adrenaline. Zira watched him fall to his knees, then forward onto his face, and realized she had a choice to make. The flesh devourer from the stars had saved her life, risking his own against predators that could have easily killed them both. Maybe, just maybe, the old stories were wrong. The heart of a protector's ear dropped from the platform with practiced grace, her crystalline skin dimming to match the shadows as she approached the fallen creature. Marcus lay unconscious on forest floor, blood seeping from multiple wounds while his skin grew pale as winter moss. Up close, she could see details that her terror had hidden before. His clothing was torn but well made, designed for exploration rather than conquest. The equipment scattered around him looked scientific rather than military. And his hands, now, slack and still, bore calluses that spoke of careful work rather than violence. She knelt beside him, her natural healing instincts overriding her cultural conditioning. The Kaleri had always been healers first, their entire philosophy built around nurturing life rather than taking it. Her grandmother had taught her that all living things deserved compassion, though she never imagined applying those lessons to a star-cursed flesh devourer. But as she examined Marcus's injuries, she began to see past the species-old prejudices to the individual beneath. The wounds were serious, but not immediately fatal. Deep cuts from the crash landing had reopened during his fight with the Shadowmaws, and he'd lost significant blood, protecting her from the predators. Using her knowledge of healing plants, Zira gathered luminescent moss that grew in the shadows of the great trees. The bioactive compounds in the moss would help clot bleeding and fight infection, while the glowing enzymes would provide energy his body needed to heal. As she worked, applying the moss to his wounds and wrapping them with soft vine cloth, Marcus began to stir. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with confusion and wariness. She could see him trying to remember where he was and what had happened, his hand moving instinctively toward where his weapon had fallen. "Peace," Zira said in her own language, then tried to remember words from the old trade dialect her grandmother had learned from off-world merchants decades ago. "You ... save. I ... help." The words felt strange in her mouth, but she saw understanding. Dawn in his dark eyes. Marcus tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged wounds. The crystalline being who had fled from him hours earlier was now tending his injuries with gentle expertise. Her touch was warm despite her glass-like appearance, and the luminescent moss sheet applied to his cuts was already numbing the pain. "Thank you," he said softly, hoping the universal translator in his pocket was still working. "I'm Marcus. I mean you no harm." "Zira," she replied, pointing to herself. Then, with careful pronunciation, "Marcus." "Human?" When he nodded, she seemed to consider this new word carefully. "Human save, Zira." Why? The question hit him harder than he'd expected. Why had he risked his life for an alien who'd fled from him in terror. Marcus thought about it as he tested his bandages, impressed by her medical skills. Because you were in danger. Because it was right. He gestured around them at the glowing forest. Beautiful place. Beautiful ... person. Worth protecting. Zira felt warmth spread through her crystalline body at his words. The universal translator was working now, converting their speech into each other's languages, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. But she needed to understand more about this creature who had saved her life. Human eat flesh? She asked, miming the action that had so terrified her earlier. Marcus realized what she was asking and couldn't help but laugh, though he immediately regretted it when she drew back in alarm. No, he said quickly, reaching for his scattered supplies. He found one of the protein bars he'd been eating and showed it to her, breaking it apart to reveal its composition. Plants, seeds, no flesh. See? He took a small bite and offered the rest to her. Zira examined the bar carefully, her enhanced senses detecting the familiar sense of processed grains and vegetable proteins. It wasn't flesh at all, just concentrated plant matter prepared in a way she'd never seen before. Human ... not flesh eater. She asked, hope creeping into her voice. Some humans eat flesh, Marcus admitted honestly. But many don't. I study plants, help them grow, heal sick worlds. He reached for his research tablet, hoping it had survived the crash. The device flickered to life, displaying holographic images of Earth's environmental restoration projects. My world dying, plants sick, need help learning. The images floating above the small device showed a world in transition, its blue-green beauty marred by patches of brown desolation. But there were other images too, showing humans working alongside vast machines to replant forests, clean poisoned waters, and restore damaged ecosystems. Zira watched in fascination as Marcus showed her project after project, where his people had chosen healing over destruction. Human fix world? She asked, her fear continuing to ebb as understanding grew. Try? Tio, Marcus said. But need knowledge. Need to learn from worlds like this. From people like Kaleri, who live in harmony with nature. He gestured at the glowing forest around them. Your people understand plants better than humans. Could teach us much. Zero was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. The flesh devourers of legend were supposed to be destroyers, consumers who left only death in their wake. But this human spoke of healing, of learning, of working to restore rather than destroy. She thought of her own people's struggles with the increasing Shadowmaw attacks, the way their traditional light defenses were becoming less effective each year. Shadowmaws grow stronger, she said finally. More each season. Village in danger. Traditional ways not enough anymore. She looked at his scattered equipment, noting devices she didn't recognize. Human technology helped fight Shadowmaws? Marcus sat up straighter, his innobiologist's mind immediately engaged by the problem. Tell me about them. What do they eat? How do they breed? What environment do they prefer? As Zira described the predators that increasingly threatened her, people, he began to see patterns. Dimensional phase shifters drawn to areas of high energy concentration, reproducing in the deep cave systems beneath the forest floor. I might be able to help, he said thoughtfully. But I'd need to work with your people, share technology and knowledge. The sound of voices calling through the forest interrupted their conversation. Zira recognized the search patterns of village scouts and realized her absence had been noticed. In moments, a team of Kaleri warriors would arrive to find her consorting with a flesh devourer from the stars. The political implications made her head spin. My people come, she said urgently. They fear humans, old stories, old hatred. Will try to kill you, Marcus nodded grimly. He'd known this moment would come eventually. First contact was always dangerous, especially when it happened by accident rather than through careful diplomatic channels. What do you want me to do? Zira looked at this strange being who had risked his life to save hers, who spoke of healing worlds and learning from other species, who had shown her kindness when she'd shown him only fear. The decision that had been building in her heart crystallized into certainty. "Trust me," she said, and stepped forward to help him stand. The first scout to break through the undergrowth was Cale Brightspear, the village's youngest circle guard and Zira's childhood friend. His crystalline armor caught the forest light. As he landed on the platform above them, his bioluminescent spear already glowing with lethal energy. Behind him came 3 more guards, their weapons trained on Marcus despite his obvious injuries. "Zira," Cale called down, his voice tight with fear and anger. "Get away from that thing. Don't let it touch you." "Cale, wait," Zira called back. But the young guard was already leaping down to their level. His spear point aimed at Marcus's heart. "He's not what you think. He saved my life from the Shadow Maws." "Lies," Cale snarled. "Everyone knows the flesh devourers are cunning. It's probably poisoned you, made you think it cares about your life. Step aside, Zira. Let us destroy this abomination before it can corrupt anyone else." Marcus raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "I don't want to fight you," he said through his translator. "I came here to learn about your world, to see if our species could help each other." "The star-cursed speak honeyed words," one of the other guards said, "but their hearts are full of hunger for our life essence. Kill it now before it can escape to threaten the village." Zira stepped between the guards and Marcus, her own crystalline skin beginning to glow with agitation. I said, "Wait. Look at him. Really look. Does he seem like a monster to you? He's injured, exhausted, and he still threw himself between me and 3 Shadow Maws to protect me." Cale's spear wavered slightly, but his expression remained hostile. "The creatures are cunning, Zira. They mimic emotions to lower our defenses. It's probably studying you right now, learning our weaknesses." "Then explain this," Zira said, activating Marcus's research tablet. The holographic images of Earth's restoration projects filled the air around them, showing humans working to heal their damaged world. "Explain why a flesh devourer would spend his life learning to grow plants, to heal sick ecosystems. Explain why he carries medicine instead of weapons, knowledge instead of tools of war." The guards stared at the floating images in confusion. These didn't match the stories they'd been told, the legends of cosmic devourers that consumed everything in their path. Here were beings that looked similar to the humans but acted like gardeners, scientists, healers. "Tricks," Cale said. But his voice lacked conviction, visual illusions to confuse us. Marcus slowly reached for another device, ignoring the way. The spear points tracked his movement. "This is a medical scanner," he said, activating it and running it over his own wounded arm. The display showed his circulatory system, the plant-based compounds Zira had used to treat his injuries, and his cellular structure in perfect detail. "I'm a xenobiologist. I study alien life forms to understand how different species adapt to their environments. I came here hoping to learn from the Kaleri, not to harm them." He turned the scanner toward Zira, and the display showed her unique crystalline cellular structure, the way her body processed light for energy, the bioluminescent organs that allowed her to communicate with her environment. "Your people have achieved something we humans dream of, perfect symbiosis with your world. You don't just live on Verdania, you're part of it. That's knowledge that could help both our species survive." Zira felt a flush of pride at his words, but also saw the growing uncertainty in the guard's eyes. "Cale, what if the old stories are wrong? What if not all star visitors are our enemies? The Shadow Maws grow stronger every year. Our traditional defenses fail more often. Maybe it's time to try something new." Before Cale could respond, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. Then another, and another, until the very air seemed to vibrate with predatory hunger. The Shadow Maws had found their location. Drawn by the noise of the confrontation and the scent of blood from Marcus's wounds. "How many?" Zira asked, her training overriding her fear. Cale's expression went grim as he counted the sounds. "At least 12, maybe more. They're coming from all directions." He looked at his small squad. then at Marcus. We can't fight that many in open forest. We need to reach the village's light barriers. Too far, another guard said. They'll catch us before we make it halfway. Marcus struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain from his wounds. I might be able to help, but I'll need to work with your people, not against them. He looked directly at Kale. Your spears use bioluminescent energy, right? Focused light beams that disrupt the Shadow Maw's phase-shifting ability? Kale nodded reluctantly. The creatures exist partially outside normal space. Concentrated light forces them into full materialization, where they can be killed. My equipment includes portable fusion flares, Marcus said, indicating his scattered gear. They burn much brighter than your weapons, but they're designed for signaling, not combat. If we could modify them to focus the energy like your spears. Impossible, Kale said. Our focusing crystals are grown, not made. They require years of careful cultivation. Zira's eyes suddenly brightened with inspiration. What about the grove crystals? The ones that store energy in the sacred trees? She looked at Marcus. Could your devices work with natural focusing crystals? Marcus examined one of the crystals Zira pointed to, his mind racing through the physics involved. Maybe the molecular structure looks compatible with standard photonic amplification. But I need to recalibrate the flare's output frequency to match the crystal's resonance pattern. The howls were getting closer now, and they could see red eyes beginning to glow in the shadows between the trees. Whatever they were going to do, they needed to do it fast. This is insane, Kale muttered. But he was already helping Marcus gather the fallen equipment, working with the flesh devourer to fight Shadow Maws. The council will have my head for this. Only if we survive long enough to tell them about it, Zira replied, carefully removing focusing crystals from the sacred grove's energy storage nodes. Marcus, will this work? Marcus was frantically rewiring his flare launcher, connecting it to the alien crystal through a series of adaptive couplers. In theory, yes. But I've never tried to interface human technology with living crystal before. The energy output could be incredible, or it could blow up in our faces. Better than being eaten by Shadow Maws, Kale said grimly, raising his spear as shapes began moving through the undergrowth around them. The first attack came from above, a mature Shadow Maw materializing on the platform they'd abandoned and dropping toward them with claws extended. Kale's spear caught it mid-fall, the focused light burning through its hide and sending it crashing back into the shadows with a shriek of pain. But more were coming, their phase-shifted forms, making them nearly impossible to track until they chose to materialize for attack. Marcus finished his modifications, just as 3 Shadow Maws rushed them from different directions. He raised the modified flare launcher, hoping his calculations were correct, and pulled the trigger. The grove crystal blazed with power as it channeled the fusion flare's energy, creating a beam of light so intense it turned the forest around them into a blazing noon despite the evening hour. All 3 attacking Shadow Maws were caught in the beam, their partially phased forms forced into full materialization, where Kale and his guards could finish them with conventional weapons. But the victory was short-lived. The brilliant light had revealed their position to every Shadow Maw in the forest, and the pack was converging on them from all sides. There are too many, one of the guards said, panic creeping into his voice. We can't fight them all. But Marcus was already modifying another flare, working with desperate speed to create a sustained light barrier rather than a focused beam. Zira, I need more crystals. Kale, can your people create a defensive circle? If I can maintain a light perimeter, your spears can pick them off as they try to breach it. For the next hour, human technology and Kaleri skill fought side by side against the Shadow Maw pack. Marcus's modified flares created barriers of blazing light that forced the predators into visible form, while the Kaleri guards used their superior agility and knowledge of the creature's behavior to strike at vulnerable moments. Zira moved between them all, treating wounds, replacing burned-out crystals, and coordinating their defense with the skill of a born leader. When the last Shadow Maw finally retreated into the deep shadows. The unlikely alliance stood, exhausted but victorious in their circle of fading light. Kale looked at Marcus with something approaching respect, while his guards were examining the modified flare launcher with professional interest. That was effective, Kale admitted grudgingly. Your light weapons are much more powerful than ours, but they lack precision. Combined with our focusing crystals and tactical knowledge, we could create a real defense system, Marcus finished. Something that could protect your villages while we work on a long-term solution to the Shadow Maw problem. Zira looked between her childhood friend and the human who had saved her life, seeing the beginning of something that could change both their people's futures. Kale, will you take him to the village? Will you let him speak to the council? Kale was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The council won't like it. There will be fear, anger, resistance to change. But after tonight, yes, I'll escort him. The flesh devourer has earned the right to speak for himself. Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. Just Marcus, please, and thank you. Both of you. He looked at Zira, remembering her terrified flight through the forest that seemed like a lifetime ago. You saved my life as much as I saved yours. Maybe that's how peace begins, one life at a time. As they gathered their equipment and prepared for the journey to the village, Zira reflected on how much had changed since that morning. The monster from the stars had become a protector, an ally, maybe even a friend. The old stories would need to be rewritten, but perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps it was time for new stories, better stories, about what different species could accomplish when they chose understanding over fear. The dawnlight was beginning to filter through Verdania's floating canopy as they set off toward the village. Human and Kaleri walking side by side into an uncertain but hopeful future.